you doing, folks? I'm going to have a look at the back wheel bearings on the Daytona. We did the front ones when we first got it because there was a couple of issues on the front end, and when I spun I was doing the fork gator, wasn't it? Spun the front wheel bearings didn't sound too good, and we had the issue with the incorrectly assembled front brake. So I've just had this up in the air, took the chain off, give it a spin, and this is rumbling a bit. So I want to pull the bearings out and either repack them if they're okay, or replace them. So what a job to get it off, man. So you can see why, unfortunately, the model just before this I think would have been the QD back wheel, you know, with the spline, where you leave the brake drum and sprocket behind. What a job to get that out of that space. If it was a push bike, you could turn it upside down and lift it out. Oh well, I've got a QD back wheel as well, but it wants a new rim and respoking, but maybe in the future. But anyway, it's off. So let's start to pull it apart. Unfortunately, someone has been in there before us, and even though I've got the right size spanners and all, you know, chewing all the edges of the nuts up. Obviously I'm going to clean them up, but now it means I'm going to file the CAD coating off and all that stuff. So let's get it set up and we'll be straight back. Okay, we're off. So I've got two tins, one for the non-chain drive side and one for the drive side, because obviously there's lots of bits of spaces and everything in here, and they've all got to go back exactly in the right order. So drum off first, and this one hasn't been chewed up. Nice. And I'm going to try and hold that while I operate the brake lever, because the spring is that strong. It's actually pushing the brake shoes on in the reverse orientation. Ooh, they look like new shoes as well. In fact, they're not even bedded in yet. Bits where they haven't even touched yet. New shoes, nice. So we've got a spacer in between the drum and the bearing, which is stepped. Obviously it's only going to go in one way. And then we've got our favourite, slightly different to the BSA. I've got an Allen screw in there. That must be a locking device. I'm assuming it's going to be Imperial. Yes. Whoa! And it's loose and it's turning. And you can take it out with that. So that locking device isn't doing anything, is it? Which you don't get on the Bizas. And that's also steel, whereas they're unshielded bearings. They're like a Zamac material. I'll take the Allen key out later. There's grease in there. The drum doesn't look too bad. A couple of scores in there, but the brakes were working fine, by the way. Just give them a rub up before they go back. Yeah, not too bad. Okay, let's spin him over. Oops, spindle's coming out. It's a heavy old back wheel, this. So, let me just move this around a bit. So while that spindle's coming out like that, I'll keep it like that because it keeps the distances correct, the amount of threads either side. You know, so when the back wheel goes back in, you've got the same number of threads on the outer locking nuts on each side. And I'm not saying they were correct, but so here's the speedo drive coming out. So let's lean that down for a second. So inside here we've got another spacer and a washer underneath the slim nut, so we can keep that all in one lump. So that's the rear, sorry, that's the rear, that's the non-drive side. So we want the speedo drive out, and it's on the right hand side of the bike, so it's going to be a lefty. So this is just a, well, it's a C-spanner that does go in the slots on the Beezers and on the Triumph, obviously, because it's the same Smiths. So we're left, so it's that way, isn't it? Tight. And she's away. Threads look okay. So we've got a dust shield because they're unshielded bearings, which is tight. And now the hard bit. There's a tube in between the bearings that when you clamp everything together, you're clamping the inner races of the bearing, and because the inner tube in the centre, the bearing spacer, is the same diameter as the ID of the bearings, or a little bit bigger, so the shaft slides through a bit easier. You can't get anything underneath the bearings to knock them out, so we know that the sprocket side is clamped and fixed against the register, and it's held in with that right-handed clamping ring. So we should be able to just, because there's a bit of latitude, this isn't machined all the way down the bearing size. They normally finishes about 50mm from the end. I'm hoping that if I draw this bearing in that direction, which it'll go, because there's a bit of latitude there, it'll draw it enough to allow that drum side bearing to come out. So just let me get set up with a bit of stuff and we'll be back. Okay, we're set up. Favourite tool. Can't tell you how many times this thing's come in handy. An immersion heater removal box spanner. But look at that. It just fits over the nuts inside there. Perfectus rectus, baby. So, I'm gonna I want it, see if I can pull it this way. It should move a bit, hopefully enough, so that should fit inside. So I'm pushing the bearing, looking good. Okay. That's how I'd look at it. Big boy. Mind you, that'll do that small one. Okay. What is going to happen? I don't know. Oh, tight baby. Tight, but I think it's moving. Something's moving anyway. See that I'm smashing something up. Now it's definitely come to a stop there, so that bearing hasn't come out. So let's have a look, see what we can do. Voila. Yeah, she's moved a good 12 mil, so there's probably half the bearing inside there, which is going to struggle with this now. This is what I was trying to say before. Because the spacer is virtually the same size or just a smidgen smaller than the bearings, there's no lip on the inside, so you can't drift it. And I've pushed it as far as it'll go with the floating bearing at the back. So there is a way. Just let me get set up and we'll be back in a short while. Okay. This is a bit of tube, or a bit of bar actually. The bearing IDs are 20, so this is like 19.5 or something. Hole drilled through the middle and then cut on an angle. So if you put a bolt through there, like so, when you tighten the bolt up, providing there's enough clearance in the holes in the middle, one taper will slide up the other and wedge into the bearing. Theoretically, it's worked in the past. It doesn't always work, but it's worth a shot, because otherwise you really struggle. So I'm going to put a drop of oil on there, not where the bearing sits, but on the threads and on the washers, so we've got a bit of lubrication against the frictional forces, and a little bit on the threads. Let's see how we go. Okay. So it's a fine thread. So I should get a better purchase. See how we go. And luckily the socket does fit down the middle. A 3/8 drive socket, obviously we'll get a 1/2 inch one down there. One more horsepower. Okay. So I'll have to spin it in the vise here because I want to drift it that way because I can't get to it at the back. So I'll be back in a sec. Okay, we spun round, got a nice drift which just fits through. Don't really need a copper face, do I, for that? Ruining me good copper faced hammers for no reason. Okay, it might not work. Let's see. Oh, oh, oh. I can live with that. So, doesn't always work. Depends how tight the bearing is. But there we go. Oh, and that bearing. Don't know if you can hear that. It's like nuts on cotton. Full of grit and all grease has gone hard. Might be okay. So, now we've got to pull the other bearing out that way. So let me get set up for that. Be back when we set up in a second. Okay, I think we're sorted. Just have to find the appropriate washer. So this now in reverse, going on the other side. Leave the tube in place because the tube is going to push against the inner race of the bearing. A washer, so my nut's not digging in to the tube. Don't know how tight this is going to be. Shouldn't be too tight because we managed to push both bearings before. Now we're only doing one, he said. So don't want to go mad. It's leaning on the spokes, but the spokes are bottomed, you know, it's on the hub of the spokes. So let's see what's going to happen. Tight, but moving. Moving. Yep, we're moving. Oh, something's moving. Oh la la, baby. bearing number 2, spacer, which goes between the two inner races. Well, that one doesn't feel too bad. Anyway, they're going to get washed. So what we're left with is on the drum side, when the bearing comes out, there's a register what the bearing sits against, and on the bottom of that register, that side, this goes in first, and this is just the dust shield, because they're unsealed bearings or grease retainer or whatever you want to call it. Then there's also like this 1mm shim which sits there. So those two items go in first before the bearing. Then obviously the bearing, then we've got our fancy wind down clamp, and that bearing is then constrained, and that's like the register, then the spacer tube, then the bearing. But there's just one more thing in there. It does two jobs. Just let me wipe the grease off my hands. There's also a dust shield, grease retainer, whatever you want to call it, in here. You can drift this out if you want to, it doesn't make any difference. But that, the second job that does, it holds this tube up between the two bearings. Otherwise, when you take the back wheel out, you pull the spindle, that would drop down and you'd struggle to get it back. So it does two jobs, holds that up like that, and because they're unsealed bearings, it keeps the grease in place. So now it's all stripped out, I'm going to give everything a paraffin wash, then brake cleaner, then the airline, inspect it. I'm going to try and dress up these nuts. Even the ones on the inside have had a battering. It's a shame really, because if I file the burrs off them, you know, they rust where you file the cad coating off. But I'd rather have them so a spanner goes on. You can always put a bit of ACF 50 on there, stop them rusting. So when everything's cleaned up, bearings have been inspected. If I'm not happy with the bearings, I'll order new ones. If I am happy, I'll re-grease them, and then we'll come back for the reassembly. So we'll catch you when everything's been tidied up, checked and cleaned. See you in a bit. Okay, we're all cleaned up. Bearings, nice. Yeah, give them a good wash, paraffin, then brake cleaner, carb cleaner, or airline them out. No play, no notchiness. So I've just repacked them with grease, ready to rock. The bearings, anyway, I think they'll only be a few quid each. They're a standard bearing. I did have the info. So they fit a multitude of bikes as well, not just the... So obviously the non-QD, the non-quickly detachable rear wheel, you know, the one that doesn't have the spline, where it leaves the brake drum, the chain, etc. behind. So they're just a standard metric bearing, 20 OD, 47 ID, 14 wide millimeters obviously, And the part number, not the Triumph part number, the part number just for the bearing manufacturers is 6204. If you wanted them shielded, if I was buying new, I would put shielded bearings in. You just put 6204-2RS. The 2RS just means they're shielded on both sides. Drive part number 37-0653. But there's no point to buy them off Triumph, because Triumph never manufactured bearings, they bought them in anyway. And these are made in the UK, so they're probably better than the ones you would buy manufactured in China without knocking anybody down, or Poland or whatever. So they're going back in because there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. All cleaned up. Oh yeah, unfortunately not detrimental. When this was built up last time, or would have been the time before, the two nuts that hold the assemblies together, because what we're doing is, with this tube that goes in the middle of the hub, we're clamping the inner races, the speedo, hub, the brake drum and everything all together. So you're clamping the inner races on the spindle with the inner nuts, and it should be tight because the bearings are only a sliding fit on this 20mm shaft. You know, they're not like a bearing fit or anything. So if those nuts are not tight, those bearings are going to chatter and move on that shaft. So that's where it's a little bit of wear on there, but they're going to be all clamped up, and that is irrelevant because nothing's going to move. So they've got to be clamped up solid when they go back, or you get that. And also the speedo drive, which is only Misak or Zamak, or you know, zinc alloy. It's been loose on that, which has worn it a little bit. Luckily it had the hardened washer behind it, but it's actually worn a little notch in the nut where it's been loose, and it's obviously only been the speedo cable that's been stopping that from spinning round. So yeah, get them the right way around. Being slack, but it won't be slack going back. So we're on this bearing first. So I've got my tins, brake drum side, drive side, speedo side. There was a couple of items that drop in the bottom of this register. One of them was the, I'm going to call it the dust retainer or the grease retainer, and the other one was the shim to get the distance right for the bearing. So the bearing's not just sat on the edge of that little lip, it's actually sat on a hardened washer with a bigger surface area that the outer race is going to sit on. And it shows in the book this going in first and that going in second. Doesn't really make any odds. I'm going to put it the other way around so that the tube has got a bit more area to sit on. Otherwise I don't want the tube to fall down at any point inside. So I'm going to fit the grease shield first, then the shim, and then the washer. See if we can tuck it in a bit closer. It's a pretty wide angle lens, unfortunately in some instances and unfortunately in others. Can't change that. Okay, so now they're in, the bearings are going to go in. I'm just going to put a bit of lubrication on there just to assist. Just bear with me a second. Okay, this is a bit of ACF 50 in here. Just let me get it going. There we go. A bearing. And I'm just going to start the bearing. I'm not going to drive it in, I'm going to pull it in. So I just need a hammer and a drift. Bit of brass will do the job, just to get it started. Just so it starts to pull in square when we oil it in. So we squared up there. So that's now ready to be pulled in. So just let me set it up in the vise so we can get the drawing gear on it. So we'll see you in a second. Okay, I think we squared up. Just soon know, because it won't go if it's not. Oh yes, we're away. I can feel it. Yeah, nice. Still square? Yeah. She's going quite nicely, and still going. Reggie has bottomed out, so I'm only pushing on the outer race, not pushing on the inner, so I can really graunch this. So now that is seated, no problemo. And this bit of threaded bar, I don't know where I got it from. It's a bit of fine thread. Metric, you know, the stuff you can buy from B&Q and all, is generally that metric course, which you can't get any horsepowers off it. There are a bit of suction. There's our bearing installed. There's our immersion heater. Removal box spanner, which is worth its weight in gold. So that now is in. So let me just take it out the vise and we'll build the front up. So see you in a second. Right, we're ready for the locking, internal locking nut. So different to a Visa in the fact that on a Visa these are generally made out of Zamac or Mizak, you know, that white metal stuff. And this also has a locking device, so they've used a slitting saw and put a slit in it there, drilled and tapped, but clearance drill on the front half of the hole. So when you put your little Allen screw in and you tighten it up, you're trying to close that machined gap, which will obviously pull on the threads and lock it up. So you don't generally get that on the Beezer, and you know, made out of steel, nice. So Should be good because I've not, oh yeah, we haven't damaged anything or, man, that's a bit tight. Knocked any, oh no, it's going. Knocked anything going in. Let's get the special tool. Here we go. So it's just a little flat plate with a couple of holes drilled in it with some bolts put in the correct distance, whatever that may be. And right-handed, obviously, on the drive side, screwing in quite nicely. Just going to give it a tap. Tight. And now we can go for the locking device. And this, I'm just going to give it a little extra tweak, not enough to do any damage to the threads, because even though this was tight, I could still unscrew it before. So that side is now built up. So we're ready to pull the other side in. So this side, obviously don't forget to put the tube in first. When you know the tube should fit through the, you don't need to put the tube in because the tube will fit through the bearing grease dusts retainer or whatever you want to call it. So this going back now, that other bearing we've just fitted, that bearing is locked in its register. That is the defined point that everything's going to be pulled against. So this second bearing that goes in, actually, we're not going to say it floats, but the bearing, well, we know the bearing width is 14 mil. What's that, about 5? And we've got about 25 mil of land there before we go on to the smaller diameter. So that bearing, when we pull it in, will find its natural position when we clamp everything together. So when I put this dust shield in first, I need to find a socket too. So I'm just using a socket just to, so again, let's just put a bit of, stop it rusting internally, a bit of ACF 50 in there. Just a bit of lubrication on that because we can. And a bit of lubrication on that because we can. So I'm just going to drift this in, not to the full bearing width. I'm going to let the bearing sort it out. So that's probably about 5 mil. And that's about 10. So that's enough for that bearing to start, because what I want to happen is when we clamp everything together against the tube inside, I want the dust shield to be up against the bearing so it does work as a dust shield. Now we've got to remember to put this in. So I'm just going to put a bit of where's my rag? Bit of ACF 50 on this so it doesn't go rusty. And as we know, does two jobs, and I just felt it go through that other shield. So that does two jobs. It holds that spacer up, so when you pull the spindle out, you know, the spacer doesn't drop down inside, but also if you're not using 2RS shielded bearings, then it's going to keep the crap out. Oh, just one thing while we're talking about these, not so important on this one, but whatever dust shields you take out, particularly on the other side, you should really put back, because whether it's a shielded or unshielded bearing, the physical widths are exactly the same. So if you don't put those shims in, sorry, I should call them shims, they're not shims, if you don't put those dust shields in, when you clamp everything up, the distance is different and things may be a little bit closer together. Particularly if you're doing a front wheel, you may find out that the brake drum is rubbing on the edge of the brake hub. So they should really go back. Whatever you've taken out should go back in. Right, the bearing, I've not got my gloves on. Greasy bearing. And again, I'm just going to lightly start that. Only tapping on the outer race, not the inner race, he said. And we're away. So just let me turn you off while I get us in the vise for using our drawing equipment again. So we're not hammering any bearings in, we're actually just gently pulling them in, which is a lot kinder to the bearing. So we'll see you in a sec. Okay, we set up, so let's see. So it shouldn't be, we are obviously pulling in the dust shield as well, but I don't think there was much energy needed to move that. So we're going, can't tell yet. Something's moving. How's the alignment? Not too bad. Don't want to touch the threads obviously, especially the left-handed one. Yes, so we're away. Going in nicely. Yeah, you'd probably struggle with solid. You'd probably struggle with metric stud iron as a draw bar because the thread is a bit coarse. So that now is all bottomed out. And then don't forget when we clamp it all together anyway, the two inner nuts which go on the inside of the swing arm, which hold it all together, are going to keep it all. Bit of suction on my grease. Oops. Now I've got grease on the spokes. Well done. Stop the spoke's rusting. So now we're in for our final bits and pieces. So we've got our bearing shield, and there is a little notch on that, so I'm going to put the little relief facing outwards so that we're clamping on the edge and we're not trying to push that bit into the bearing. Will it go in the other way? No, it'll touch. So it's got to go, if you like, with the indentation facing outwards. And this is a lefty, he said. I always struggle with left-handed. I've got it going first time. Have I crossed it? No. I always struggle with left-handed threads. You don't get the feel of them the same, do you? What you're used to. So this is now going to clamp the outer. So we're all pulled in on the inner and bottomed out. So we don't need to go crazy on this. Because what you'd be doing is, the inner race we know is held rigid. You would be trying to force the outer bearing so the rollers in the bearing are right, leaning on this outer lip, which is not what it's all about. I mean, that is all that needs, because it's only driving the speedo, isn't it? So speedo, here we go. So we run our spacer. Again, I'm just going to put the spindle through, so it just holds it in place. So our tube stayed up there, which is nice. So there's the spacer. I'm going to line up your drive dogs. So what am I there? About 1:45. So we're on. Then I want my fin washer. Which stops the nut ripping this soft material up when you tighten it up. And it's the slim nuts, obviously, which go, the smaller slim nuts. So the outer ones, he said, which have gone wrong straight away. No, there we go. We're on. So now it's a case of balancing the distance of the amount of threads either side, but obviously we've got to build the front part up next. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to spin you round and we'll build the brake drum up. So we'll see you in a second. Okay, we spun in the vise. Just one thing I never mentioned, the spindle is not symmetrical in the fact that there's more threads on one end than the other. So you want the shorter threaded portion on the drive side and the longer threaded portion on the speedo side, because we need to balance out how many threads are sticking out either side. So just let me slide this back in. Nearly there. Okay, coming through. So we need our spacer, which makes up the distance between the inner race of the bearing and the brake plate, and it's stepped and obviously only goes in one way, so the step goes through the clamp, and the brake plate, which I'm going to struggle with because they're new shoes. Wow, I've not got the strength. It's a strong spring, that. Come on, baby. Yes. Woo. Okay. So let me get my connects. So that's not the right one, that's the outer one. That's the inner one. Come on, baby. Now there is no water. It would be nice to have a washer under this. There isn't one. I mean, when I put this back in, if there is any clearance in the swing arm and these nuts, I will put a washer under it. It's a bit cruel, isn't it, tying it up without a washer? And I've actually got one, but it may not go in with a washer. So these are 5" and 5/16. So I'm gonna, now we're clamping everything up on that, on those inner races, so that we're not relying on the inner race of the bearings on the shaft. Difficult to tell because gotta wait till I get it on the bike, because the spring is so strong. Feels nice anyway. And the last bit is we've got to get our threads the same length either side. So I've got 24 on that side and 26 on this side. So 24 and 26 is 50 divided by 2. So it's going to be 25 either side to give me the same length of threads. So if I do the long side, it's 25. If I've got it right. Not bad. Not bad without my glasses. Plus or minus half a guide dog. Okay, we're all clamped up. Try and hold this brake drum off. It's hard because it's such a strong spring, but yeah, we're away anyway. Can't get it, but if you find the, oh, got it then. If you find the midpoint, yeah. So I can only check that really when it's on the bike, which is not going to be until tomorrow because it's beer o'clock. So we'll catch you. It'll be a harder job putting the back wheel in. But I'll drop the back wheel in tomorrow and we'll just set it up just to see how it spins. So that'll be the last one tomorrow morning. So we'll catch you tomorrow morning for the last 2 minutes. See you then. Okay, I think we're done. Just got the chain to put on and the brake light spring. I just left that off because I wanted to spin the wheel. Let's have a look. So I've got my adjustment of the spindle, so it's equal with our, what was it, 25mm each side or something, maybe different on another bike, but yeah, in the middle anyway, so you've got the same proportion. And she runs lovely with no play. Just, yeah. Couple of things. The relationship with the brake plate and the speedo drive, you have to adjust them so they're in the right orientation between themselves before you lock everything together with the inner nuts, sorry. Otherwise you know, your cable's going to be uphill or downhill or something. But when it's all locked up in the right position, no problem. The other thing that makes life a tad easier is you can actually walk the bike by yourself quite easily, single-handed, with 2 pieces of 4x2. So on the stand, if you just push it away from you on the stand, so you're lifting one leg up, slide one block under one side, go around the other side, push it against this to lift it up to pivot it against the front wheel and this part of the stand, slide the other 4x2 in, and it gives you loads of clearance. So you just obviously got to take off that bit, slacken off that front one, don't take it out, slacken off this one, lift it up here somewhere, and I just tied it up in the air with a bit of cord, and then you bring the wheel in this way and it just slides in dead easy. So that extra, you need that extra 2 inches to make life easy for yourself. Anyway, happy days. There is another couple of jobs, not worth a video though, but the steering lock I didn't have a key for, so I've just bought a new steering lock. I've got to drill the old whatever's in front of the grub screw out or whatever. Should be fairly straightforward. And I've got a new rev counters because the old one's not very responsive, and I'm not sure whether it's an original one. I don't think it's a Lucas one, but Chinese-ish. So we'll see what the new one goes like. But it's charging and everything fine, but you know, just don't like the look of the needle thrashing around. So it's a job done, chain on, adjusted, brake light switch spring, road test. So we'll catch you on the next one. See you later, folks.